My name is Elena Vasquez. I am 37 years old, and I am the founder and CEO of Cascade Digital Marketing, a firm that generates $18 million in annual revenue and employs 73 people across 3 offices. Last month, I closed a deal with a Fortune 500 client that will bring in $4 million over the next 2 years. I own a beautiful home in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, with a backyard where my daughter plays, and I drive a car I paid for in cash. But 5 years ago, I was paying my older sister Rebecca $850 every single week to live in her basement with my daughter, and when Rebecca forgot my daughter's 6th birthday, I discovered something that changed everything about how I understood my family and my place in it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me tell you how a single forgotten birthday exposed years of manipulation, how I went from being financially dependent on family members who exploited me to building a multimillion-dollar business, and how I learned that the people who are supposed to protect you can sometimes be the ones taking advantage of you in ways you never imagined. This is the story of how I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my daughter's future. I should start by explaining how I ended up in my sister's basement in the first place. When I was 28 years old, I was married to a man named Daniel Martinez. We had met in college, dated for 3 years, and married shortly after graduation. Daniel was charming and ambitious, working in commercial real estate development. I was working as a marketing coordinator at a small advertising agency, making decent money but nothing spectacular. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. When I was 29, I became pregnant with our daughter Sophia. The pregnancy was planned and celebrated. Daniel seemed excited about becoming a father. He attended doctor's appointments with me and helped set up the nursery in our small apartment. When Sophia was born, she was perfect. 7 pounds 3 ounces with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. I fell in love with her instantly and completely. The first few months of Sophia's life were exhausting but joyful. I took 3 months of maternity leave from my job. Daniel continued working, often long hours, but he would come home and hold Sophia, giving me breaks when I needed them. We were functioning as a team, or so I believed. I had no idea that Daniel was already planning his exit from our marriage. When Sophia was 4 months old, Daniel came home from work one evening and told me he was leaving. He said he had met someone else, one of his colleagues at the real estate firm. He said he had been unhappy in our marriage for a long time. He said he still cared about me but was not in love with me anymore. He said he would support Sophia financially, but that he wanted a divorce as quickly as possible. I was devastated. I had not seen this coming. There had been no major fights, no obvious signs of discontent. Or perhaps there had been signs and I had been too sleep-deprived and focused on caring for an infant to notice them. Either way, the result was the same. My husband was leaving me when our daughter was 4 months old. Daniel moved out the following week. He rented an apartment across town with his new girlfriend, a woman named Kristen who worked in his office. The divorce proceedings began immediately. Daniel hired an aggressive attorney who made it clear that he wanted the divorce finalized quickly, and that he would fight any attempt by me to get substantial spousal support, or child support, beyond the legal minimum. The divorce was brutal. It took 8 months to finalize. During that time, I was working full-time at my marketing job while caring for Sophia essentially as a single parent. Daniel exercised his visitation rights sporadically. Sometimes he would take Sophia for his scheduled weekend, and sometimes he would cancel at the last minute because he had plans with Kristen. I could not rely on him for anything beyond the minimum child support that the court ordered, which was approximately $800 per month. When the divorce was finalized, I was left with almost nothing. Daniel and I had owned almost no assets together. We had been renting our apartment and we had minimal savings. The small amount we did have in savings went toward legal fees. I walked away from my marriage with my daughter, my personal belongings, my car that was 7 years old and needed constant repairs, and about $3,000 in my bank account. My job at the advertising agency paid $42,000 per year, which sounds like reasonable money until you factor in the cost of living in Portland, the cost of childcare, and the fact that I was now supporting myself and my daughter on a single income. After taxes, I was bringing home approximately $2,800 per month. Childcare alone cost $1,200 per month. that left $1,600 for rent, utilities, food, car expenses, health insurance copays, and everything else Sophia and I needed. I tried to make it work. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in a less expensive neighborhood. Sophia slept in the bedroom and I slept on a futon in the living room. I bought groceries carefully, planning meals around what was on sale, cooking large batches of food that would last several days. I drove my old car and prayed it would not break down because I had no money for repairs. I bought Sophia's clothes at thrift stores and accepted hand-me-downs from friends. I was doing everything I could and I was still barely surviving. Every month was a calculation of which bills I could pay on time and which ones I could delay. Some months I had to choose between paying my electric bill in full or buying enough groceries. I opened credit cards to cover emergencies, and those credit cards quickly accumulated balances I could not pay off. Within a year of my divorce, I was $20,000 in credit card debt and falling further behind every month. I was exhausted all the time. I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning to get Sophia ready for daycare. I would drop her off at 7, drive to work a full day, often staying late to prove my dedication and value, pick up Sophia at 6, drive home, make dinner, play with her for an hour, give her a bath, read her stories, put her to bed, and then I would sit at my kitchen table and cry from exhaustion and stress. This was my life. I was drowning and I did not know how to save myself. My family situation was complicated in ways that made my struggle even more difficult. My mother, Patricia, and my father, Robert, had divorced when I was 12 years old. It had been an ugly divorce involving infidelity on my father's side. My mother had been devastated and bitter. She had raised my older sister Rebecca and me primarily on her own after the divorce, working as a paralegal to support us. My father had remarried quickly to the woman he had been having an affair with, and he had largely disappeared from our lives, paying minimal child support and seeing us only occasionally. My sister Rebecca was 4 years older than me. She had always been my mother's favorite, though my mother would never have admitted it. Rebecca was the firstborn, the one who had supported our mother through the divorce, the one who seemed to do everything right. Rebecca had gone to a good college, gotten a degree in finance, and landed a well-paying job at an investment firm. By the time she was 30, she was making over $100,000 per year, and had bought a house in a nice suburb of Portland. My mother adored Rebecca. She bragged about Rebecca's success constantly. She talked about Rebecca's job, Rebecca's house, Rebecca's accomplishments. Meanwhile, I had always been the problematic daughter in my mother's eyes. I had chosen to study marketing instead of something more prestigious like law or medicine. I had married young, which my mother had warned me against. When my marriage failed, my mother's attitude was essentially that I had made my bed and now had to lie in it. When I was struggling financially during the year after my divorce, I did not want to ask my family for help. I knew my mother would use it as an opportunity to lecture me about my poor choices. I knew Rebecca would be judgmental about my situation. But eventually, when I was 2 months behind on my rent and facing eviction, I had no choice. I called my mother and explained that I needed help. My mother's response was cold. She said she had her own expenses and could not afford to support me. She said I needed to figure out my own problems. She said she had warned me about marrying Daniel, and I had not listened, and now I was dealing with the consequences. She suggested I get a second job or move to a cheaper apartment or ask Daniel for more money. None of these suggestions were helpful or realistic. I could not work a second job because I had a toddler to care for. I was already living in a cheap apartment. Daniel was paying the court-ordered minimum and would not pay more voluntarily. After my mother refused to help, I called Rebecca. I explained my situation, how I was behind on rent, how I was drowning in debt, how I was terrified of losing my apartment and having nowhere to go with Sophia. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When I finished explaining, there was a long pause. Then Rebecca said she had a solution. She said she had a finished basement in her house that she had been thinking about renting out for extra income. She said I could move in there with Sophia. The basement had a large room that could serve as a bedroom and living area, plus a small bathroom and a kitchenette. It was not huge, but it was decent space. Rebecca said I could live there, and in exchange I would pay her rent. I was relieved. This seemed like a reasonable solution. Living with family would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet financially. I asked Rebecca how much rent she wanted. She said $850 per week. I was shocked by the amount. $850 per week was $3,400 per month, which was more than I was currently paying for my one-bedroom apartment. I told Rebecca I could not afford that much. Rebecca's response was matter of fact. She said that was the market rate for a space like her basement in her neighborhood. She said she was not running a charity. She said if I wanted to live there, that was the rent. She added that I should consider myself lucky because I would be getting a much nicer space than my current apartment, in a better neighborhood, and I would have family support. I did not know what to do. I was desperate. I was about to be evicted. I had a daughter to think about. So I agreed to Rebecca's terms, even though I knew the rent was unreasonably high, and that I would struggle even more to pay it than I had struggled to pay my previous rent. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I moved into Rebecca's basement 2 weeks later. The space was exactly as she had described it. One large room, approximately 400 square feet, with industrial carpet and concrete walls that had been painted white. There was a small bathroom with a shower, sink, and toilet. There was a kitchenette with a mini refrigerator, a microwave, and a hot plate, but no real stove or oven. There was one small window near the ceiling that let in minimal natural light. It was a basement and it felt like a basement. It was dark and cold and slightly damp, but it had a roof and it was shelter for Sophia and me, and I told myself it would only be temporary. Rebecca's house was beautiful. It was a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom colonial in a neighborhood with excellent schools and tree-lined streets. The main floor had hardwood floors, updated kitchen with granite counters and stainless appliances, a formal dining room, and a spacious living room with a fireplace. Upstairs were the bedrooms, including a master suite with a walk-in closet and spa bathroom. Rebecca lived there alone. She had never been married and had no children. The house was immaculate and decorated like something from a magazine. I was not allowed in the main house except by invitation. Rebecca made this clear from the beginning. She said she valued her privacy and her space. She said the basement had its own entrance, and I should use that entrance exclusively. I could come upstairs to do laundry in her laundry room, but only at designated times. I could store food in her main refrigerator if my mini fridge was full, but I needed to label everything clearly and not take up too much space. These were her rules, and if I wanted to live there, I had to follow them. The first month in the basement was difficult but manageable. I paid Rebecca $3,400 for the month's rent. This left me with almost nothing for other expenses. I had to put groceries and gas on my credit cards. I had to delay paying some of my other bills. But Sophia and I had a place to live, and I told myself that was what mattered. Sophia was 2 years old at this time, old enough to notice that our living situation had changed. She did not understand why we were living in a basement. She did not understand why we could not go upstairs in the house whenever we wanted. She would ask why Aunt Rebecca's house was so big and beautiful, and why we lived in the small dark room downstairs. I did not know how to explain it to her in a way that made sense. Rebecca and I established a routine. I would leave early in the morning with Sophia, drop her at daycare, go to work, pick her up in the evening, and return to the basement. I would cook our dinner on the hot plate or in the microwave. We would eat together, and then I would play with Sophia, give her a bath in the small bathroom, and put her to bed. I would stay up late working on my laptop, trying to build freelance marketing clients on the side to bring in extra income. I was working constantly, sleeping 4 or 5 hours per night, and still falling short financially every month. Rebecca would occasionally come downstairs to collect the rent, which I paid in cash every Friday. She would knock on the door, I would open it, and she would stand in the doorway while I counted out the money. $850 in cash every single week. She would take the money, thank me, and leave. These interactions were brief and transactional. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about Sophia. She simply collected her rent and left. Sometimes I would see Rebecca leaving for work in the morning, dressed in expensive business suits, carrying designer handbags, driving her BMW. Sometimes I would see her returning from shopping trips, carrying bags from upscale stores. Sometimes I would hear her upstairs entertaining friends, their laughter and conversation filtering down through the ceiling while Sophia and I sat in the basement eating ramen noodles because it was all I could afford after paying rent. The contrast between Rebecca's life and mine was stark and painful. We were sisters, living in the same building, but inhabiting completely different realities. She was thriving financially, living in luxury and comfort. I was struggling to survive, living in her basement, paying her more in rent than she was paying on her entire mortgage. I knew this because I had done the research. I had looked up property records online. Rebecca's mortgage payment was $2,800 per month. I was paying her $3,400 per month in rent, which meant she was profiting $600 monthly from me, plus I was covering the entire cost of her mortgage. I told myself this was a temporary situation. I told myself I would save money, pay down my debt, and move out into my own place within a year. But the reality was that paying Rebecca such high rent made it impossible to save anything. Every month I was barely breaking even, and sometimes I was not even managing that. My credit card debt continued to grow. My stress continued to mount. My exhaustion became a permanent state of being. Sophia's third birthday came and went while we lived in the basement. I tried to make it special despite our circumstances. I decorated our room with streamers and balloons. I made her a cake using the hot plate and microwave, which was a challenge, but I managed it. I bought her a few small presents that I could not really afford. We celebrated just the two of us in the basement. Rebecca did not come downstairs to wish Sophia happy birthday. She did not acknowledge the day at all. Then Sophia turned 4, and again we celebrated in the basement. Again Rebecca did not acknowledge it. I was hurt by her indifference but not surprised. Rebecca had never been particularly interested in Sophia. She viewed my daughter as part of the baggage of my failed marriage, evidence of my poor life choices. During these years in the basement, something was growing inside me. It was not anger exactly, though there was certainly anger. It was more like determination. I was working at my marketing job during the day and building my freelance client base at night. I was teaching myself advanced digital marketing techniques, taking online courses, reading everything I could find about search engine optimization, social media marketing, content strategy, and analytics. I was developing skills that went far beyond what my current job required. I started getting more freelance clients, small businesses that needed websites and social media management, startups that needed marketing strategy. I was doing this work late at night after Sophia was asleep, working on my laptop in the basement, often until 2 or 3 in the morning. I was exhausted, but I was also energized by the possibility that I could build something of my own, something that could eventually free me from my dependence on Rebecca and my dead-end job. By the time Sophia was 5 years old, I was making an additional $1,500 per month from freelance work. This was significant, but it was still not enough to allow me to move out of Rebecca's basement. The rent she charged was too high, and I was still paying down credit card debt. But I was making progress, and that progress gave me hope. I continued paying Rebecca $850 every Friday. After 3 years of this arrangement, I had paid her over $130,000 in rent. Let me say that number again. $130,000. I had made my sister wealthy while I struggled to afford groceries. She had taken advantage of my desperate situation to profit enormously, and she felt no guilt about it whatsoever. Now I need to tell you about what happened when Sophia turned 6, because that was when everything changed. That was when I discovered the truth about how my sister viewed me and my daughter. That was when I realized I had been allowing myself to be exploited, and that I needed to make a drastic change. That was when my journey from that basement to the CEO position I hold today truly began. Sophia's 6th birthday was approaching, and I wanted to make it special. 6 felt like a significant milestone. She was starting 1st grade. She was becoming more aware of the world around her. She understood that we lived differently than other families, that we had less than others, and I wanted to give her a birthday that would make her feel celebrated and valued despite our circumstances. I had been saving money for months specifically for this birthday. I had put aside small amounts here and there from my freelance income, hiding cash in an envelope in my dresser drawer. By the time her birthday arrived, I had saved $400. This was a fortune to me at that time. I planned to use it to take Sophia to a local amusement park, buy her the bicycle she had been wanting, and throw her a small party with a few friends from school. 2 weeks before Sophia's birthday, I mentioned my plans to Rebecca. It was a Friday evening, and she had come downstairs to collect the rent. After I handed her the cash, I said, "Sophia's birthday is coming up in 2 weeks. I'm planning to have a small party for her on Saturday afternoon. Just a few kids from her school. We'll have it down here in the basement. I wanted to let you know in case you hear noise. Rebecca nodded. That's fine. Just keep it down. I have plans that day anyway. I was also thinking, I continued. Maybe you could come to the party for a little while? It would mean a lot to Sophia. You're her aunt, and she doesn't have much family in her life. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. I'll see if I can stop by. I'm pretty busy lately. Work has been intense. I should have recognized the dismissiveness in her response, but I chose to hope that she would make the effort. Sophia adored Rebecca, or at least the idea of Rebecca. She saw her aunt as this successful, glamorous figure who lived upstairs in the beautiful house. Sophia would ask about Rebecca constantly. Why don't we see Aunt Rebecca more? Why doesn't Aunt Rebecca ever play with me? Can we go upstairs and visit Aunt Rebecca? I would make excuses for Rebecca's absence and disinterest, protecting Sophia from the painful truth that her aunt simply did not care about her. Sophia's 6th birthday arrived on a Saturday in September. It was a beautiful fall day, sunny and crisp. I had decorated the basement with pink and purple streamers, Sophia's favorite colors. I had set up a folding table with a store-bought cake decorated with unicorns. I had organized simple party games and bought party favor bags for the 5 children Sophia had invited from her 1st grade class. The party was scheduled to start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The kids arrived with their parents, who looked around the basement with barely concealed pity. I saw them taking in the concrete walls, the industrial carpet, the small window, the cramped space. I saw them exchanging glances with each other. I felt humiliated but focused on Sophia, who was beaming with joy, happy to have her friends there. We played games. We ate cake. The kids laughed and ran around in the small space. Sophia opened her presents, thanking each friend politely. I gave her the bicycle I had bought, which I had hidden in the basement storage area. Her face lit up when she saw it. She threw her arms around me and said, "Thank you, Mama. This is the best birthday ever." But through all of this, Rebecca never came downstairs. Not for 5 minutes. Not even to say happy birthday. I kept watching the door, hoping she would appear. Sophia kept asking, "Where's Aunt Rebecca? Is she coming?" I kept saying, "She'll be here soon, sweetie. She's probably just busy." The party ended at 4 o'clock. The parents picked up their children. Sophia and I cleaned up the basement, taking down decorations, throwing away paper plates and cups, putting away leftover cake. Sophia was tired but happy. She kept hugging her new bicycle and talking about her friends and how much fun she had had. That evening, after Sophia was asleep, I went upstairs. I knew Rebecca was home because I had heard her car pull into the driveway hours earlier, shortly after the party had ended. I knocked on her door using the interior entrance that connected the basement to the main house, the door I was only supposed to use for laundry purposes. Rebecca opened the door. She was wearing yoga pants and a sweatshirt, holding a glass of wine. "What's up?" she asked. "You missed Sophia's birthday party," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She kept asking for you." Rebecca sighed. "I told you I was busy. I had things to do today." "What things?" I asked. "You were home. I heard you come back hours ago. You couldn't come downstairs for even 10 minutes to wish your niece happy birthday?" Rebecca's expression hardened. "Elena, I don't owe you or your daughter anything beyond giving you a place to live. I collect my rent from you every week. That's our arrangement. I'm not required to play doting aunt on top of everything else." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "She's 6 years old, Rebecca. She's your niece. She loves you." "That's not my problem," Rebecca said coldly. "You chose to have a child with a man who left you. You chose to get divorced. You chose to end up in a situation where you needed my help. I gave you that help by letting you live here, and you pay me rent for that privilege. But I don't owe you emotional labor on top of financial support. Sophia's birthday is not my responsibility." I stared at my sister, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. She was not just indifferent. She was contemptuous. She viewed Sophia and me as beneath her. As charity cases, she was benevolently allowing to occupy her basement in exchange for exorbitant rent that more than paid her mortgage. "You're charging me $3,400 a month to live in a basement," I said quietly. I've paid you over $130,000 in the 3 years I've been here. That's not charity, Rebecca. That's profit. You're making money off my desperation." Rebecca's face flushed. "If you don't like the arrangement, you're free to leave any time. No one is forcing you to stay here. You stay because you can't afford anything better. That's not my fault." She started to close the door, but I put my hand against it. "Why do you treat us this way?" I asked. "We're sisters. Sophia is your niece. Why are you so cold?" Rebecca looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been guilt or discomfort, but it was gone quickly. "You've always been the one who needed rescuing, Elena. You make poor choices and then expect other people to fix things for you. I'm tired of it. I'm providing you with housing. That's more than enough." She closed the door in my face. I stood there in the hallway trembling with anger and hurt. Then I went back downstairs to the basement where my daughter slept peacefully, clutching her new stuffed unicorn, completely unaware that her aunt had deliberately ignored her 6th birthday because she simply could not be bothered to care. That night, lying on my mattress next to Sophia's small bed, staring at the ceiling of the basement, I made a decision. I was done. I was done accepting scraps from people who viewed me as less than. I was done paying my sister a fortune to treat my daughter and me with contempt. I was done being grateful for the privilege of living in a dark basement, while Rebecca lived in luxury upstairs. I was going to change my circumstances, whatever it took. I was going to build something for Sophia and myself that no one could take away from us. I was going to succeed not just in spite of my family's neglect but as proof that their judgment of me had been wrong from the beginning. I did not know exactly how I was going to do it yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that things were going to change. The forgotten birthday was not just a painful moment. It was a catalyst. It was the moment I stopped hoping my family would value me and started building value for myself that did not depend on anyone's approval or support. It was the beginning of everything that came after, of the business I would build, of the success I would achieve, of the life I would create for my daughter where she would never again have to wonder why family members who should love her simply could not be bothered to care. I need to take you back to understand how I became the person who would accept living in a basement and paying exploitative rent to her own sister. I need to explain the foundation that was laid in my childhood, the losses that shaped me, and the family dynamics that taught me to accept less than I deserved. My story does not begin in that basement. It begins much earlier, in a house across town where I learned what it meant to be the second choice, the afterthought, the daughter who could never quite measure up. I was born in Portland, Oregon, on a rainy November morning. I was the second daughter of Patricia and Robert Vasquez. My sister Rebecca had been born 4 years earlier, and my arrival was apparently not as celebrated as hers had been. My mother told me this herself when I was older, during one of her moments of brutal honesty. She said that when Rebecca was born, she and my father had been overjoyed, that Rebecca had been planned and wanted and anticipated. When I came along 4 years later, I had been an accident, an unexpected pregnancy that disrupted my mother's plans to return to work full-time. My earliest memories of our family are fragmented but mostly happy. We lived in a modest split-level house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood. My father worked as an insurance adjuster, and my mother worked part-time as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. We were solidly middle-class, comfortable but not wealthy. We took vacations to the Oregon coast every summer. We had family dinners most nights. On the surface, we looked like a normal, functional family. My father, Robert, was a gentle man with an easy laugh. He was tall and thin with dark hair that was already graying at the temples when I was small. He worked long hours but always made time to play with Rebecca and me when he came home. I have specific memories of him coming through the door in the evening, loosening his tie, and immediately scooping me up and spinning me around until I shrieked with laughter. I remember him reading bedtime stories to me, doing different voices for different characters, making me giggle even when I was supposed to be settling down to sleep. My mother, Patricia, was different. She was efficient and practical, always busy with some task or project. She kept the house immaculate. She managed the family finances with strict attention to the budget. She was involved in Rebecca's school activities, volunteering for the PTA and attending every event. She was a good mother in many practical ways, ensuring we were fed and clothed and educated. But she was not warm. She did not offer spontaneous affection. She did not tell us she loved us or hug us for no reason. Affection had to be earned through achievement and good behavior. Even as a young child, I understood that Rebecca was special to my mother in a way that I was not. Rebecca was the firstborn, the planned child, the daughter who had made my mother a parent for the first time. My mother's entire identity seemed wrapped up in Rebecca's accomplishments. When Rebecca brought home good grades, my mother would display them on the refrigerator and call relatives to brag. When Rebecca performed in school plays or sang in choir concerts, my mother would attend every performance and take dozens of photos. I tried to earn the same attention. I worked hard in school, bringing home report cards with excellent grades. I joined activities hoping my mother would be proud. But the response was always muted compared to how she reacted to Rebecca's achievements. When I brought home straight A's, my mother would say something like, "That's good, Elena. Keep it up." When Rebecca brought home the same grades, my mother would plan a special dinner to celebrate and call my grandmother to share the news. This disparity in treatment became more pronounced as I got older. Rebecca could do no wrong in my mother's eyes. She was smart, beautiful, talented, destined for great things. I was competent but unremarkable, a decent student but not exceptional, pleasant but not particularly special. This was the narrative my mother constructed, and over time I internalized it. I began to believe that I was indeed less valuable than Rebecca, that I deserved less attention and celebration because I simply was not as worthy. My father treated Rebecca and me more equally. He seemed to love us both without the complicated calculations and comparisons that characterized my mother's affections. But my father was often absent, working long hours or traveling for his job. When he was home, my mother dominated the household dynamics. Her view of Rebecca and me became the family's view. When I was 8 years old and Rebecca was 12, something happened that I did not fully understand at the time, but that changed everything about our family. I came home from school one day to find my mother crying at the kitchen table. This was shocking because my mother never cried. She was stoic and controlled, priding herself on keeping her emotions in check. But there she was, tears running down her face, tissues scattered on the table in front of her. Rebecca was sitting next to her, holding her hand. When I walked in, Rebecca looked at me and said, "Go to your room, Elena. Mom needs space." I obeyed, confused and frightened. I went to my room and sat on my bed, straining to hear what was happening downstairs. I could hear my mother's voice, pitched high with emotion, and Rebecca's voice quieter and soothing. I could not make out the words, but I understood that something terrible had happened. Later that evening, my father came home. I heard raised voices downstairs, my parents arguing in a way I had never heard before. My mother was shouting. My father's voice was defensive and pleading. I put my pillow over my head and tried not to listen, but fragments came through. I heard my mother say the word betrayal. I heard my father say mistake. I heard my mother say, "That woman from your office." The next morning my father was gone. My mother gathered Rebecca and me in the living room and told us that Dad had done something very wrong, that he had been unfaithful to her, that he would be moving out and that they would be getting divorced. She delivered this information in a flat, emotionless voice, as though she were reading from a script. Rebecca nodded as though she already knew. I burst into tears, not fully understanding what was happening, but understanding that my father was leaving, and that our family was breaking apart. My mother's face hardened when she saw me crying. "Stop that, Elena. Crying does not help anything. We need to be strong now." She put her arm around Rebecca, pulling her close. She did not reach for me. I sat alone on the other end of the couch, crying while my mother comforted my sister. The divorce proceedings began immediately. My father moved into an apartment across town. The woman from his office, whose name was Jennifer, moved in with him almost immediately. Within 6 months, my father and Jennifer were engaged. Within a year they were married. My father's betrayal was complete and public, and my mother's humiliation was deep and lasting. The divorce devastated my mother, but it also gave her a kind of bitter purpose. She threw herself into being a single mother, working full-time at the law firm and managing the household alone. She became harder and more rigid, less patient with anything she perceived as weakness or failure. She also became more dependent on Rebecca, treating her less like a daughter and more like a confidant and ally. Rebecca stepped into a quasi-parental role during this time. She was 12 years old, but my mother treated her like an adult. They would have long conversations about the divorce, about my father's failings, about money worries and household concerns. My mother would ask Rebecca's opinion on decisions and defer to her judgment. Meanwhile, I was still treated like a child, excluded from these conversations, sent to my room when adult matters were being discussed. My relationship with my father deteriorated after the divorce. He maintained visitation rights, and Rebecca and I were supposed to spend every other weekend with him at his apartment. But the visits were awkward and painful. Jennifer was always there, trying too hard to be friendly, asking questions about school and friends that felt invasive coming from her. My father seemed different in her presence, trying to prove that he was happy in his new life, that leaving our family had been the right choice. Rebecca handled these visits with cold politeness. She would answer questions in monosyllables and spend most of the weekend reading in the guest room my father had set up for us. I tried harder to maintain a connection with my father. I wanted him to still love me. I wanted to believe that even though he had left Mom, he had not left me. But over time his attention waned. He would cancel visits because he and Jennifer had plans. He would forget to call on my birthday or show up late to school events he had promised to attend. The message was clear. He had moved on to a new life, and Rebecca and I were remnants of his old life, obligations to be minimally fulfilled rather than daughters to be cherished. By the time I was 10 years old, my father's visits had become sporadic. He would see us maybe once a month instead of every other weekend. He paid child support because the court ordered it, but he was not present in any meaningful way. When I was 11, Jennifer became pregnant with my father's child. When she gave birth to a son they named Ryan, my father's attention shifted almost entirely to his new family. Rebecca and I became afterthoughts, former children from a previous marriage that he seemed eager to forget. This abandonment by my father had different effects on Rebecca and me. Rebecca became harder and more cynical. She decided that men were not to be trusted, that relying on anyone besides yourself was foolish, that the only person you could count on was yourself. She threw herself into academic achievement and career planning, determined to be financially independent and successful, so she would never need anyone. I responded differently. I internalized the abandonment as evidence that I was not worthy of love or commitment. If my own father could stop caring about me, then clearly something was wrong with me. I became a people pleaser, trying desperately to be good enough, likable enough, valuable enough that people would not leave me. I sought approval from teachers, from friends, from my mother, from anyone who would give it. I shaped myself around what I thought others wanted me to be rather than developing a strong sense of who I actually was. My mother's bitterness about the divorce poisoned our household for years. She would make cutting comments about my father, about men in general, about marriage being a trap that left women vulnerable. She told Rebecca and me repeatedly that we needed to focus on education and careers, that we should never depend on a man for financial security, that marriage was a risk not worth taking. These lessons were delivered with the force of commandments, rules for survival in a world that would take advantage of women if they were not careful. Rebecca absorbed these lessons completely. She became focused and driven, her entire identity built around achievement and independence. I absorbed them too, but incompletely. Part of me still wanted the fairy tale, the happy marriage, the loving partner. Part of me still believed that I could build a family that would be different from the broken one I had grown up in. This hope was naive, but it persisted despite everything I had witnessed. Throughout my teenage years, the dynamic in our household remained consistent. Rebecca was the golden child, the one who made our mother proud, the one whose achievements justified the sacrifice my mother had made in raising us alone. I was the adequate child, the one who did well enough but never quite excelled, the one who was easy to overlook. My mother attended Rebecca's high school graduation with tears of pride. She attended mine with distracted politeness, leaving early because she had to work the next day. When Rebecca went to college at the University of Oregon to study finance, my mother was ecstatic. She helped Rebecca move into her dorm room, bought her supplies and furniture, called her several times a week to check in. When I went to Portland State University 2 years later to study marketing, my mother's response was muted. She did not help me move. She did not buy me supplies. She told me I had chosen a state school close to home because I was not ambitious enough to go away like Rebecca had. I stayed in Portland for college partially because it was cheaper, but also because I was afraid to leave. I was afraid of being completely alone, of having no family nearby even if that family was emotionally distant. I commuted to classes from home, living in my childhood bedroom trying to save money while earning my degree. Rebecca, meanwhile, thrived at the University of Oregon, making the dean's list, joining business societies, building a network of contacts that would serve her throughout her career. After college, Rebecca landed a job at an investment firm in Portland. She moved into a small apartment initially, but within 2 years she had been promoted twice and was making enough money to buy her first house. My mother was insufferably proud, bringing up Rebecca's success in every conversation, telling relatives and friends and anyone who would listen about her daughter, the finance professional who owned property at age 26. I graduated from Portland State with good grades and some marketing internship experience. I got a job at a small advertising agency making $38,000 a year. It was a decent starting position, but it was not impressive in the way Rebecca's career trajectory had been impressive. My mother's response to my employment was lukewarm. She acknowledged that I had a job but did not celebrate it. The contrast between her reaction to my accomplishments and her reaction to Rebecca's was painful and obvious. During this time, I met Daniel Martinez at a networking event for young professionals. He was handsome and charming, working in commercial real estate, ambitious and confident. He paid attention to me in a way that felt intoxicating. He asked about my work, my interests, my dreams. He made me feel seen and valued. We started dating, and within months I was deeply in love with him. My mother disapproved of the relationship from the beginning. She said Daniel seemed superficial, that I was too young to be serious about anyone, that I should focus on building my career rather than getting distracted by romance. Rebecca was similarly dismissive. She met Daniel once at a family dinner, and afterward told me privately that he seemed like someone who was more interested in how things looked than in substance. I dismissed both of their concerns. They did not know Daniel the way I did. They did not see how he treated me when we were alone, how attentive and loving he could be. When Daniel proposed after we had been dating for 2 years, my mother's response was resigned rather than joyful. She said, "If this is what you want, then I suppose I am happy for you." Rebecca did not attend my bridal shower, claiming she had a work conflict. She came to the wedding but left immediately after the ceremony, again citing work obligations. I told myself that their lack of enthusiasm did not matter, that I was building my own life now, my own family with Daniel, and their approval was not necessary. I told myself that once Daniel and I were married and settled, once we had children and built a beautiful life together, my mother and Rebecca would see that I had made a good choice. I told myself that I would prove them wrong. But the truth was that their disapproval cut deeply. Even as I planned my wedding and imagined my future with Daniel, part of me worried that they were right, that I was making a mistake, that I was not mature enough or wise enough to make good decisions about my life. These doubts were whispers in the back of my mind, easily drowned out by the excitement of new love and new possibilities. But they were there, planted by years of being told implicitly and explicitly that I was the less capable sister, the one who needed guidance and whose judgment could not be trusted. When Sophia was born and Daniel seemed happy and engaged, I felt vindicated. I had a husband, a daughter, a family of my own. I had built something good despite my mother's and Rebecca's skepticism. But that vindication was short-lived. When Daniel left 4 months after Sophia's birth, I felt not just heartbroken but humiliated. My mother and Rebecca had been right. I had made a poor choice in marrying him. I had trusted the wrong person. I had failed in exactly the way they had predicted I would fail. This failure, this confirmation of everything my family had always believed about me, made it impossible for me to ask them for help when I needed it most. I knew what they would say. I knew they would view my struggling as evidence of my poor judgment and lack of capability. When I finally did ask for help and my mother refused, it hurt, but it did not surprise me. When Rebecca offered to let me live in her basement but charged me exploitative rent, it was painful but somehow felt like what I deserved. I had failed. I had proven myself to be exactly what they had always thought I was. Why should they treat me with generosity or compassion? Looking back now, I can see how the foundation laid in my childhood set me up to accept mistreatment as normal. I had learned that love was conditional, that it had to be earned through achievement and good behavior, that I was inherently less valuable than my sister. I had learned that my needs were secondary, that asking for help was a sign of weakness, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention or support I received. I had learned that I could not trust my own judgment, that my choices were suspect, that I needed to defer to people who supposedly knew better than I did. These lessons were deeply ingrained. They shaped how I saw myself and how I allowed others to treat me. They made me vulnerable to exploitation because I believed on some fundamental level that I did not deserve better. The forgotten 6th birthday was not just about Rebecca's coldness in that moment. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being told through actions, if not words, that I was less important, less worthy, less deserving of care and consideration. That night in the basement, staring at the ceiling while my daughter slept, I began to question those lessons for the first time. I began to wonder if maybe the problem was not that I was inadequate, but that I had been surrounded by people who treated me as inadequate because it served their purposes to do so. The months following Sophia's 6th birthday party became a period of quiet observation for me. I stopped making excuses for Rebecca's behavior and started truly seeing the pattern that had been there all along. Living in her basement was not a temporary arrangement born of sisterly generosity. It was a business transaction that heavily favored her, and she had structured it deliberately to keep me dependent while profiting from my desperation. I began noticing things I had previously overlooked or rationalized away. Every Friday when Rebecca came downstairs to collect her rent, she would count the cash carefully, sometimes twice, as though I might try to shortchange her. She never asked how Sophia and I were doing. She never inquired about my week or my work. She simply took the money, folded it into her wallet, and left. The entire interaction usually lasted less than 2 minutes. I was not her sister in those moments. I was a tenant and not even a valued one. I was someone she tolerated because I paid her well for the privilege. I started keeping a detailed record of our financial arrangement. I calculated that over the 3 years I had been living in the basement, I had paid Rebecca $133,600. Her monthly mortgage payment, which I had verified through public property records, was $2,800. This meant her annual mortgage cost was $33,600. In 3 years, I had paid her enough to cover her mortgage for nearly 4 years. I was not just covering her housing costs. I was financing her wealth building while barely surviving myself. The basement space itself had required no renovation or preparation before I moved in. Rebecca had finished it years earlier when she first bought the house, intending to rent it out but never following through. The kitchenette, bathroom, and main room had all been ready to occupy. She had invested nothing additional to accommodate Sophia and me. Yet she was charging me market-rate rent for a single-family home in an upscale neighborhood for what was essentially a below-grade studio apartment, with minimal natural light, and no real kitchen facilities. Beyond the financial exploitation, I began noticing the smaller ways Rebecca maintained distance and reinforced our unequal positions. When I needed to do laundry, I was permitted to use her washer and dryer only on Tuesday and Thursday evenings between 7 and 9 o'clock. If I missed that window, I had to wait until the next designated time or go to a laundromat. Rebecca herself could do laundry whenever she pleased, of course. The restriction applied only to me. When I occasionally needed to store items in her refrigerator because my mini fridge was too small, everything had to be clearly labeled with my name and the date. Rebecca would periodically go through the refrigerator and discard anything of mine that was not properly labeled, or that she deemed had been there too long. She never gave me warning or asked if I still wanted the items. She simply threw them away. Meanwhile, her refrigerator was full of expensive organic produce and imported cheeses and craft beers, items I could only dream of affording after paying her rent. The rules about access to the main house were enforced with increasing strictness as time went on. Initially, Rebecca had said I should use the basement entrance but had not made it an absolute prohibition to use the interior door. Over time, however, she began locking that door from her side. The message was clear. The basement was my space, and the rest of the house was hers. I was not welcome upstairs under any circumstances unless specifically invited, which happened rarely and only when Rebecca needed something from me. There was one occasion during that fall after Sophia's birthday when Rebecca asked me to watch her house while she went on a vacation to Hawaii with friends from work. She would be gone for 10 days, and she wanted someone to bring in her mail, water her plants, and generally keep an eye on things. She asked me to do this and I agreed, hoping it might be an opportunity to improve our relationship, or at least demonstrate that I was helpful and trustworthy. During the 10 days Rebecca was gone, I went upstairs daily to care for her house. Walking through the main floor was painful. Everything was beautiful and expensive. The hardwood floors gleamed. The furniture was designer quality. The kitchen had every gadget and appliance imaginable. The living room had a massive flat-screen television and a sound system that probably cost more than I made in a month. Upstairs, the master bedroom was like a hotel suite, with a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet full of expensive clothes and shoes, and a bathroom with a soaking tub and separate glass shower. I watered her plants as requested. I brought in her mail and stacked it neatly on her kitchen counter. I even cleaned a bit, wiping down counters and making sure everything looked perfect for her return. When Rebecca came back from Hawaii, tan and relaxed, she came downstairs to tell me she was home. I expected some acknowledgement of the favor I had done, some thanks for taking care of her house. Instead, she said, "I noticed you used my bathroom upstairs while you were watering the plants. Please do not do that again. Use your own bathroom downstairs." I had indeed used her bathroom once, on a day when Sophia had been sick and had spent a long time in our small basement bathroom. I had needed to use a restroom and had used the one upstairs rather than waiting. I had left it spotlessly clean. But Rebecca had noticed, and she was reprimanding me for it. The implicit message was that I was overstepping boundaries, that I needed to remember my place, that the upstairs bathroom was not for people like me even when I was doing her a favor by maintaining her house. This incident crystallized something for me. Rebecca did not see me as family. She saw me as a subordinate, someone whose position was beneath hers, and needed to be reminded of that fact regularly. The wealth disparity between us was not an accident or a temporary situation. It was something Rebecca actively maintained and perhaps even enjoyed. She liked having her struggling younger sister living in her basement, paying her exorbitant rent, demonstrating through our contrasting circumstances that Rebecca was the successful one, the capable one, the sister who had made good choices and was reaping the rewards. Around this same time, my mother visited the house for the first time since I had moved into the basement. She had not come by in the 3 years I had been living there, always claiming she was too busy, or that the drive from her apartment across town was inconvenient. But Rebecca invited her for Thanksgiving dinner, and as part of that invitation, she told our mother that Sophia and I could join them upstairs for the meal. I was surprised by the invitation. Rebecca had never included us in any holiday celebrations before. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. These occasions came and went with Rebecca entertaining friends upstairs while Sophia and I remained in the basement, cooking our own modest meals and pretending we did not mind being excluded. But this year, apparently because our mother would be present, we were suddenly welcome at the family table. Thanksgiving Day arrived and Sophia was excited. She wore her nicest dress, a hand-me-down from a friend that I had carefully washed and ironed. I had made a sweet potato casserole to contribute to the meal, preparing it in advance using a borrowed oven at Derek's house since I only had a microwave and hot plate in the basement. We went upstairs at the appointed time, Sophia holding my hand, both of us nervous about this rare inclusion in a family gathering. My mother was already there, sitting in Rebecca's living room with a glass of wine. She looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray, her face more lined. She stood when we entered and gave me a brief, stiff hug. Then she looked down at Sophia and said, "My goodness, you have gotten so big. How old are you now?" "I am 6, Sophia said proudly. "I had a birthday in September." "Did you?" my mother said vaguely. "That is nice." She did not apologize for missing the birthday or acknowledge that she had not seen Sophia in over a year. She simply returned to her seat and her wine. The Thanksgiving meal was uncomfortable from beginning to end. Rebecca had prepared an elaborate feast, turkey with all the traditional sides, everything beautifully presented. The dining room table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. Everything looked magazine perfect. We sat down to eat, and the conversation was stilted and superficial. Rebecca talked about her work, about a promotion she was expecting, about a vacation she was planning to Bali. My mother asked questions and made appropriate admiring comments. I sat quietly, cutting Sophia's turkey into small pieces, helping her with her food, saying little. At one point my mother turned to me and asked, "So Elena, Are you still working at that advertising agency? Yes, I said. I have been there for almost 10 years now. I also do freelance marketing work on the side. That is good, my mother said without real interest. It must be hard managing work and raising Sophia alone. It is challenging, I admitted. But we are managing. Well, you made your choices, my mother said. There was no sympathy in her voice, just a statement of fact. Marrying Daniel was always going to be risky. I tried to tell you that. I felt my face flush. Sophia was sitting right there listening. Mom, can we not discuss this right now? I am just saying that you should have listened to me. I have more life experience. I know what men are like. You were too young and naive to see what I saw. Rebecca interjected, perhaps sensing that I was about to respond sharply. Elena has been living here for a few years now, she told our mother. It has worked out well for everyone. That was generous of you, my mother said to Rebecca. Taking them in like that. You always were the more responsible one. I bit my tongue and said nothing. Rebecca had not taken us in out of generosity. She had seen an opportunity to profit from my desperation, and she had seized it. But there was no point in saying this. My mother had always viewed Rebecca as the superior daughter, and nothing I could say would change that perception. After dinner, Rebecca brought out pumpkin pie and coffee. Sophia was getting tired and restless. She was not used to sitting at a formal table for so long. She asked if she could be excused to go back downstairs. I told her yes, and she left gratefully, heading back to the basement where she felt more comfortable. Once Sophia was gone, the conversation shifted. My mother and Rebecca began discussing family matters, specifically my grandmother's estate. My mother's mother had passed away the previous year, and there had been a small inheritance. My mother mentioned that she had put her portion into a retirement account. Rebecca mentioned that she had used hers as a down payment for a rental property she was purchasing as an investment. I had received nothing from my grandmother's estate. I had not even known there was an inheritance being distributed. When I asked about it, my mother and Rebecca exchanged a glance. Then my mother said, "Your grandmother specified in her will that the money was to be divided between Rebecca and me. You were not included." I felt as though I had been slapped. Why was I not included? I do not know, my mother said, but her tone suggested she did know and approved of the decision. Perhaps she felt that Rebecca was more financially responsible. Perhaps she wanted her money to go to people who would use it wisely. The implication was clear. I was not financially responsible. I could not be trusted with money. My grandmother, who I had loved and who I thought had loved me, had deliberately excluded me from her will because she viewed me as unworthy or incapable. Whether this was true or whether my mother and Rebecca had somehow influenced my grandmother's decision, I would never know. But the result was the same. Once again, I was the daughter who did not merit equal treatment, who was judged and found wanting. I left shortly after that revelation, going back downstairs to the basement where Sophia was playing with her toys. I felt hollowed out and defeated. Every interaction with my family reinforced the same message. I was less than Rebecca. I deserved less. My struggles were my own fault, and I should not expect help or fairness or basic familial loyalty. The holiday season that year was particularly difficult. Rebecca hosted a Christmas party upstairs for her friends and colleagues. I could hear the music and laughter through the ceiling, the sounds of people enjoying themselves at a celebration Sophia and I were not invited to. On Christmas morning, Rebecca came downstairs briefly to give Sophia a present, a small toy that looked like something she had picked up as an afterthought at a drugstore. She stayed for perhaps 5 minutes, made awkward small talk, and then went back upstairs to spend the day alone, watching movies and eating leftover party food. Sophia asked me why we could not spend Christmas with Aunt Rebecca. I did not have a good answer. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that some people simply do not care about you, even when they are family? How do you explain that we lived in the same building but in different worlds, that the beautiful house upstairs might as well be a fortress for how inaccessible it was to us? I told Sophia that Aunt Rebecca was busy and needed her own space, but even as I said it, I knew Sophia could sense the hollowness of the explanation. The new year brought no improvement in our circumstances. January was particularly brutal financially. The holidays had required spending money I did not have on gifts for Sophia, and on special food to make the season feel celebratory. My credit card debt had grown to nearly $25,000. I was paying minimum payments that barely covered the interest charges. I was trapped in a cycle where I worked constantly but never got ahead, where every dollar I earned was already allocated to rent or childcare or debt payments before I even received my paycheck. I was also exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. I was emotionally depleted from the constant stress of financial insecurity, from the humiliation of living in my sister's basement and being treated as a second-class citizen in my own family, from the loneliness of raising Sophia essentially alone with no support system. Some mornings I would wake up and lie in bed for a few extra minutes, staring at the ceiling, gathering the energy to face another day of the same grinding routine. But I had Sophia and she needed me to keep going. I would hear her stirring in her small bed next to mine, and I would force myself to get up to make breakfast, to get her ready for school, to put on a brave face and pretend that everything was fine. Children should not have to worry about adult problems. I was determined to shield Sophia from the worst of our situation as much as I could. She knew we did not have much money. She knew we lived in a basement. But I tried to make sure she felt loved and safe, and that she understood our circumstances were temporary and would improve. During this period, I became increasingly isolated. I had lost touch with most of my college friends, who had moved on to careers and relationships and lives that did not include struggling single mothers. The few friendships I had maintained were with other parents from Sophia's school, but these were superficial connections based on shared experience of parenting, rather than deep emotional bonds. Derek and his family remained supportive, but I was hesitant to burden them too much with my problems. I did not want to be the friend who was always in crisis, always needing help, always dragging down the mood with tales of hardship. My freelance marketing work was growing slowly but steadily. I had started with 1 or 2 small clients and had gradually built to about 8 regular clients who provided ongoing work. This was in addition to my full-time job at the advertising agency. I was essentially working 2 jobs, one during normal business hours and one late at night after Sophia was asleep. The freelance income was making a difference, adding about $1,500 to $2,000 per month to what I earned from my regular job, but it was still not enough to allow me to move out of Rebecca's basement while also paying down debt and covering all our expenses. I began researching what it would take to start my own marketing agency. This was not a fully formed plan yet, just an idea I was exploring in whatever spare moments I had. I knew that my freelance clients were paying me hourly rates that were significantly lower than what large marketing agencies charged. If I could formalize my services, build a real business with multiple employees, and take on larger corporate clients, the earning potential could be substantial. But starting a business required capital I did not have, time I did not have, and a level of business knowledge I had not yet acquired. Still, the idea took root. Late at night, working on my laptop in the dim light of the basement while Sophia slept, I would research business formation, marketing agency best practices, pricing strategies, client acquisition tactics. I taught myself about search engine optimization, pay-per-click advertising, social media algorithms, content marketing, and conversion rate optimization. The digital marketing landscape was evolving rapidly, and I made it my mission to stay ahead of the curve, to understand emerging trends and technologies before they became mainstream. One evening in February, I was working on a particularly complex project for one of my freelance clients when Rebecca came downstairs unannounced. This was unusual. She normally only came down on Fridays to collect rent or when she specifically needed something from me. It was a Tuesday evening about 9 o'clock. Sophia was already asleep. Rebecca looked around the basement, taking in my makeshift office set up on the small kitchen table, my laptop surrounded by papers and notepads, the coffee cup that had gone cold hours earlier. "You are still working?" she asked. "I have a freelance project due tomorrow," I explained. "I am almost finished." Rebecca nodded slowly. Then she said, "I wanted to talk to you about something. I am planning to raise the rent." My stomach dropped. Raise the rent? By how much? "I am thinking another $100 per week. So $950 instead of $850. The market has changed. Property values in this neighborhood have increased. I think the adjustment is reasonable." I stared at her. $950 per week would be $3,800 per month. That would consume nearly all of my take-home pay from my regular job. I would be entirely dependent on my freelance income for everything else: childcare, food, utilities for the basement, gas, insurance, clothing, everything Sophia and I needed. It was unsustainable. Rebecca, I cannot afford that, I said carefully. I am already paying you more than I can really manage. An increase would make it impossible for me to save anything or pay down my debt. Then perhaps you need to find additional work, Rebecca said. Her tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel but not sympathetic either. Or perhaps you need to make other living arrangements. I am not obligated to subsidize your housing. You are not subsidizing my housing, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. I am paying you $3,400 a month for a basement studio. That is more than your entire mortgage payment. You are profiting from me, not helping me. Rebecca's expression hardened. I own this property. I set the terms. If you do not like them, you are free to leave. But let me be clear about something, Elena. You have been living here for over 3 years. You have paid rent, yes, but you have also benefited from living in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Sophia has stability here. Where exactly would you go if you moved out? Can you afford first and last month's rent plus a deposit on a new place? Do you have the credit score to qualify for a decent apartment? Have you saved any money at all, or have you spent everything you earn? She knew the answers to these questions. She knew I was trapped. I had no savings. My credit score was terrible because of my debt and late payments. I could not afford the upfront costs of moving to a new place. And she was using this knowledge to justify increasing my rent, squeezing even more money out of my desperate situation. When would this increase take effect? I asked quietly. Beginning next month. April 1st. That gives you 6 weeks to adjust your budget. After she left, I sat at my table staring at my laptop screen without seeing it. 6 weeks to somehow earn more money or find a way to cut expenses that were already minimal. 6 weeks before my already precarious financial situation became completely untenable. This was when I understood with absolute clarity that Rebecca did not care about me or Sophia. We were not family to her. We were a revenue stream. And as long as I stayed in her basement, as long as I accepted her terms, I would remain powerless and exploited. That night, lying awake while Sophia slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to pay the increased rent. I was going to use the next 6 weeks to execute a plan I had been developing in my mind for months, but had been too afraid to pursue. I was going to leave the advertising agency where I had worked for a decade and start my own digital marketing firm. It was risky. It was terrifying. But staying in this basement, continuing to accept exploitation from my own sister, continuing to model for my daughter that this was what she should expect from life, that was more terrifying than any business risk I might take. I was done being the daughter who accepted less. I was done being the sister who could be taken advantage of. I was done paying Rebecca a fortune for the privilege of living in her basement and being treated with contempt. I was going to build something of my own, something that Rebecca could not control or take away from me. And I was going to show my daughter that when the world tries to keep you down, you stand up and fight for something better. The 6 weeks between Rebecca's announcement of the rent increase and its scheduled implementation became a crucible that would either destroy me or forge me into something stronger. I chose to be forged. Every day during that period, I woke up with a singular focus that cut through the exhaustion and fear. I was going to leave the basement, leave my dependence on Rebecca, and build a business that would support Sophia and me independently. The question was not whether I would do it, but how I would make it happen with almost no resources and very little time. The first thing I needed to understand was exactly what I had to work with. I spent an entire weekend creating a comprehensive assessment of my situation. I documented my income from both my full-time job and my freelance work. I listed every expense, every debt, every financial obligation. I calculated what I would need to survive if I left my job at the advertising agency and committed fully to building my own firm. The numbers were daunting but not impossible. My freelance work was already generating nearly $2,000 per month. If I could triple that within 3 months, I could match my current salary. If I could build beyond that, I could actually start getting ahead financially for the first time in years. I also took inventory of my professional assets. I had 10 years of experience in marketing and advertising. I had developed expertise in digital marketing strategies that many traditional agencies were still struggling to understand. I had 8 active freelance clients who were satisfied with my work and might be willing to follow me to a new firm. I had a portfolio of successful campaigns I had created. I had skills in search engine optimization, social media marketing, content creation, email marketing, and analytics that were increasingly valuable in a digital-first business environment. What I lacked was not competence or knowledge. What I lacked was confidence and capital. The confidence issue I would have to work through psychologically. Years of being told I was the less capable sister, the one who made poor choices, had created deep-seated doubts about my abilities. But I was beginning to question whether those doubts were accurate assessments of my limitations, or whether they were narratives imposed by people who benefited from keeping me small and dependent. My freelance clients certainly did not see me as incompetent. They hired me repeatedly, referred me to others, and expressed satisfaction with the results I delivered. Perhaps the problem was not my capability but rather who I had been listening to about my worth and potential. The capital issue was more concrete and more difficult. Starting a business, even a service-based business that did not require inventory or physical products, required money. I would need business registration fees, a website, marketing materials, potentially some software subscriptions and tools, and most critically, enough cash reserves to cover my living expenses while I built the client base to a sustainable level. I calculated that I needed at minimum $15,000 to launch properly and cover expenses for the first 3 months while revenue ramped up. I had approximately $4,000 in my checking account. This was more than I usually had because I had been aggressively saving from my freelance income in recent months, anticipating that I might need to move out of Rebecca's basement eventually. But $4,000 was nowhere near the $15,000 I needed. I had no one I could borrow from. My credit cards were maxed out. Traditional bank loans were not an option given my credit score and lack of collateral. I needed to find another way to bridge the financial gap. The solution came from an unexpected source. One of my freelance clients was a small tech startup called Dataflow Solutions. I had been managing their social media and content marketing for about 8 months. The founder, a woman named Jennifer Park, had been particularly pleased with my work. Their social media engagement had increased by 300% under my management, and their website traffic had doubled. Jennifer had mentioned several times that she wished she could hire me full-time, but that the startup could not yet afford a full-time marketing employee. I reached out to Jennifer and asked if we could meet for coffee. When we sat down together at a cafe near her office, I explained my situation honestly. I told her I was planning to start my own digital marketing agency, that I was leaving my full-time job to pursue it, and that I wanted to offer her a proposition. Instead of continuing to pay me hourly for ongoing small projects, what if Dataflow became my first retainer client? I would commit to 20 hours per week of dedicated marketing work for a monthly retainer of $3,000. This would give them significantly more of my time and attention than they were currently getting, and it would give me a stable anchor client to build my business around. Jennifer considered this carefully. She asked about my business plan, my strategy for building the agency, and how I would ensure that I could deliver quality work for Dataflow while also serving other clients. I had prepared for these questions. I walked her through my plans, my timeline, and my approach to client management. I showed her the results I had already delivered for her company and explained how I could expand those results with more dedicated time and resources. After nearly an hour of discussion, Jennifer agreed. She said she believed in my abilities and wanted to support another woman entrepreneur. She also said that she had been planning to increase their marketing budget anyway, and this arrangement would give them more value than hiring an agency at typical agency rates. We shook hands, and I had my first $3,000 per month retainer client. It was not the full $15,000 I needed for startup capital, but it was a foundation. It meant that from day one of launching my business, I would have predictable monthly revenue of $3,000. That was enough to cover basic expenses if I was extremely careful with my budget. With Jennifer's retainer commitment secured, I moved forward with the practical steps of business formation. I registered Cascade Digital Marketing as a limited liability company with the state of Oregon. I purchased a domain name and built a professional website over the course of 2 intensive weekends, working late into the night after Sophia was asleep. The website showcased my portfolio, explained my services, and positioned me as a digital marketing specialist for small to mid-sized businesses. I created social media profiles for the business. I designed business cards and basic marketing materials using free design tools online. Every dollar I spent was carefully considered and minimized wherever possible. The hardest part was resigning from my job at the advertising agency. I had worked there for nearly 10 years. It was stable employment with health insurance and paid time off and a predictable paycheck. Walking away from that security to pursue something uncertain felt reckless and terrifying. But I knew that if I did not take this risk now, I would remain trapped in the cycle of barely surviving, of paying Rebecca exploitative rent, of working constantly but never building toward anything better. I scheduled a meeting with my manager, David Chun, and gave my 2 weeks' notice. I explained that I was starting my own business, and that while I was grateful for the opportunities the agency had provided, I needed to pursue this next chapter. David was surprised but gracious. He asked if there was anything the agency could do to convince me to stay. I told him honestly that the decision was not about dissatisfaction with the agency, but about needing to build something of my own. He understood and we parted on good terms. In fact, David mentioned that if my new agency ever needed to partner with a larger firm on projects, I should reach out to him. This small gesture of support meant more to me than he probably realized. During my final 2 weeks at the agency, I worked diligently to transition all my projects and responsibilities. I also quietly reached out to several clients I had developed relationships with over the years. I did not solicit them directly, as that would have been unethical, but I let them know that I was starting my own firm, and gave them my new business contact information in case they ever needed marketing services beyond what the agency provided. 2 of those clients contacted me within weeks of my departure, asking about my availability for specific projects. This was the beginning of what would become a steady stream of referrals and new business. While all of this professional preparation was happening, I also had to address the living situation. I had decided I would not pay Rebecca's increased rent. Instead, I would move out. But finding an affordable apartment that would accept someone with my credit score and limited savings was extraordinarily difficult. I spent hours searching rental listings, calling landlords, filling out applications. Most landlords required first and last month's rent plus a security deposit, which typically totaled 3 times the monthly rent. Even for modest apartments in less desirable neighborhoods, this meant coming up with $4,000 to $5,000 upfront. I expanded my search to include basement apartments, mother-in-law units, and rooms for rent in shared houses. I looked at places far from the city center where rent was cheaper. I considered every option, no matter how less than ideal it might be. What I needed was a place that Sophia and I could afford, where we would be safe, and where I could focus on building my business without the psychological weight of living under Rebecca's roof and under her control. The breakthrough came through Derek's mother, Susan. When I told Derek about my plans to start the business and move out of Rebecca's basement, he mentioned it to his parents. Susan, who had always been supportive of me, reached out with an offer. She had a colleague at her law firm whose mother had recently moved into assisted living. The mother's house, a small 2-bedroom bungalow in the St. John's neighborhood, was sitting empty. The colleague was not ready to sell it yet for sentimental reasons, but was willing to rent it at a below-market rate to the right tenant. Susan had vouched for me, explaining my situation and my character. The colleague agreed to meet with me. The house was modest but charming. It had been built in the 1940s and showed its age in places. The kitchen was outdated with old appliances and worn linoleum floors. The bathroom had pink tiles that were probably original to the house. The hardwood floors throughout needed refinishing. But it had 2 real bedrooms, a small backyard, a living room with good natural light, and most importantly, it had character and warmth. It felt like a home in a way the basement never had. The rent was $1,200 per month. This was less than half what I had been paying Rebecca. The landlord, a kind woman named Margaret Chun, who was the daughter of the house's owner, explained that she was not trying to maximize rental income. She just wanted someone responsible who would take care of the house and treat it with respect, while she figured out what to do with the property long term. She had been touched by Susan's description of my situation and wanted to help. She said she would waive the usual requirement for first and last month's rent, and would accept just 1 month's rent and a small $500 deposit to move in. Total upfront costs would be $1,700. I could afford $1,700. Barely, but I could do it. We scheduled my move-in date for April 1st, the same day Rebecca's rent increase was supposed to take effect. This timing was not accidental. I wanted to leave on exactly the day she expected me to start paying more. I wanted her to understand that I was choosing to leave, rather than accepting her exploitation for even one more month. The 2 weeks before the move were frantic. I was wrapping up my job at the agency, launching my business, packing our belongings, and preparing Sophia for another transition. I explained to Sophia that we were moving to our own house, a place that would be just ours, where she would have her own bedroom and where we would have a backyard to play in. She was excited but also nervous. The basement had been her home for half her life. It was familiar, and children crave stability even when the situation is less than ideal. I did not tell Rebecca I was moving until 1 week before the move date. I wanted to minimize the time she had to try to guilt me into staying or to create obstacles. When I finally told her, it was a Friday evening when she came down to collect the rent. I handed her the cash as usual and then I said, "This will be the last rent payment. Sophia and I are moving out next week." Rebecca's reaction was immediate and sharp. "What do you mean you are moving out? Where are you going?" "I found a house to rent in St. John's. We are moving there on April 1st. "You cannot afford to move out," Rebecca said. Her tone was not concerned but rather accusatory, as though I was doing something inappropriate or irrational. "I have made arrangements," I said calmly. "The rent at the new place is much less than what I have been paying you." "Much less? That neighborhood is not safe. The schools are not as good. You are making a mistake because you are upset about the rent increase. That is emotional decision-making, Elena. That is exactly the kind of poor judgment you have always been prone to." I felt anger rising but kept my voice steady. "I have been paying you $3,400 a month to live in a basement. That is more than you pay for your entire mortgage. You were planning to increase it to $3,800. That is not a sustainable situation for me. I found housing I can actually afford, and I am taking it." "So this is about money," Rebecca said. "You resent that I charge you market rate rent. You think I should give you charity because we are related. I think charging your sister who is struggling to survive nearly $4,000 a month to live in a basement is exploitative, yes. I think forgetting your niece's birthday because you cannot be bothered to care about her is cruel. I think you have treated Sophia and me not like family but like tenants you barely tolerate. So yes, we are leaving." Rebecca's face flushed with anger. "I gave you a place to live when you had nowhere else to go. I took you in when you were about to be evicted. I have been accommodating your presence in my home for over 3 years. And this is the gratitude I get? Accusations that I exploited you?" "You did exploit me," I said quietly. "You saw that I was desperate, and you charged me as much as you thought you could extract from me. You profited enormously from my desperation. I have paid you enough rent in 3 years to cover your mortgage for 4 years. That is not help, Rebecca. That is a business transaction that heavily favored you." "Get out," Rebecca said coldly. "If you want to leave, then leave now. I want you out of this house by the end of the weekend." "I was planning to leave on April 1st, I said. "I have already arranged for movers and notified the new landlord of that date. I do not care about your plans. I want you out now. You have 3 days." This accelerated timeline was challenging but not impossible. I called Margaretchen and explained the situation. She graciously agreed to let me move in immediately even though April 1st was still a week away. I called the movers and rescheduled for that Sunday instead of the following weekend. I called Derek and asked if he could help me pack and move on short notice. He agreed immediately and recruited his father to help as well. That weekend was a blur of packing boxes, disassembling furniture, and moving our belongings out of the basement and into a rental truck. Rebecca stayed upstairs the entire time, never coming down to say goodbye to Sophia or to wish us well or to acknowledge in any way that her sister and niece were leaving after 3 years of living under her roof. Her absence was telling. When we were useful to her as a source of income, she wanted us there. The moment I asserted boundaries and chose to leave, we became invisible to her. On Sunday afternoon, Derek, his father Michael, and I loaded the last boxes into the truck. I did one final walkthrough of the basement to make sure we had not forgotten anything. The space looked strange without our belongings. Just an empty room with industrial carpet and white concrete walls and one small window. It looked exactly like what it was, a basement. Not a home. Not a place where a family should have lived for 3 years. Just a basement. I went upstairs one last time to return the key. I knocked on Rebecca's door. She opened it but did not invite me in. I held out the key. We are all moved out. The basement is clean. Thank you for letting us stay here. Rebecca took the key without comment. There was a moment where I thought she might say something, might acknowledge that this was the end of something, might express some regret or offer some words of reconciliation. But she just took the key, said goodbye, Elena, and closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment, processing the finality of it. Then I went outside to where Derek was waiting with Sophia in the truck. We drove across town to St. John's, to the little house that would be our new home, and I did not look back. The house in St. John's was everything the basement had not been. It had windows that let in natural light. It had a kitchen where I could actually cook. It had a backyard where Sophia could play. Most importantly, it was ours. I was not living there at someone else's sufferance. I was not paying exploitative rent to a family member who viewed me with contempt. I was renting from a kind landlord at a fair price, and I was building a life and a business that would eventually allow me to buy my own home. That first night in the new house, after we had unpacked the essentials and set up Sophia's bedroom, I tucked her into her new bed. She looked small in the space, surrounded by moving boxes and unfamiliar walls. "Mama," she said, "is this really our house?" "Yes, baby. This is really our house." "Will Aunt Rebecca ever visit us here?" I hesitated. I did not want to lie to her, but I also did not want to hurt her with the truth that Rebecca would almost certainly never make the effort to visit, that we had been discarded now that we were no longer financially useful. "I do not know, sweetheart. But we have each other and we have this house and we are going to be just fine." Sophia nodded and closed her eyes. Within minutes she was asleep. I sat in the rocking chair in her room for a long time, watching her breathe, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility. I had taken an enormous risk. I had left stable employment. I had moved us out of Rebecca's house with only 1 month's rent worth of savings remaining after paying the deposit and first month's rent on this place. I had clients lined up but no guarantee that the business would generate enough income to sustain us. I was terrified, but I was also free. For the first time in 3 years, I was not living in someone else's basement, subject to their rules and their judgment. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly choosing my own path, rather than accepting whatever circumstances or family members imposed on me. The symbolic loss of the basement was actually a gain. I had lost the illusion that my family would ever value me or support me in meaningful ways. But in losing that illusion, I had gained clarity about who I was and what I was capable of when I stopped waiting for permission or approval from people who would never grant it. I went to sleep that night on a mattress on the floor of my new bedroom, surrounded by unpacked boxes, with $400 left in my checking account and a business that was exactly 1 week old. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, it felt like the first day of the rest of my life. The foundation had been laid not in the years of accepting less than I deserved, but in the moment I chose to walk away from that basement and everything it represented. Now I would build something on that foundation that no one could take away from me. The first 3 months after leaving Rebecca's basement were a masterclass in survival and determination. I was working more hours than I had ever worked in my life, but the nature of the work had changed fundamentally. Instead of dividing my energy between a job that offered limited growth potential and freelance work squeezed into late-night hours, I was now pouring everything into building Cascade digital marketing. Every client I secured, every campaign I launched, every dollar I earned was mine. The exhaustion was still there, perhaps even more intense than before, but it was accompanied by a sense of purpose and possibility that had been absent during those years in the basement. The house in St. John's became both our home and my office. I converted the second bedroom into a workspace, setting up a desk I had bought secondhand from a thrift store, and organizing my files and materials. Sophia's bedroom was across the hall, and I could hear her playing or sleeping while I worked. The proximity felt right. I was building this business not just for myself but for her, to create a life where she would never have to accept the kind of treatment Rebecca had shown us, where she would grow up understanding that she deserved respect and kindness, and that family should never be a source of exploitation. My daily routine during those early months was relentless. I would wake at 5:30 in the morning and work for 2 hours before Sophia woke up. I would get her ready for school, drop her off by 8, and then return home to work until 3 in the afternoon when I needed to pick her up. After getting her home and situated with a snack and homework, I would work another 3 hours while she played or watched limited television. We would have dinner together, and then I would spend time with her, reading stories or playing games or just talking about her day. After putting her to bed at 8:30, I would work until midnight or 1 in the morning, sometimes later if a deadline demanded it. This schedule gave me approximately 12 to 14 hours of work time per day, which I needed to service my existing clients while also pursuing new business. The Data Flow Solutions retainer was my foundation, providing $3,000 per month in predictable revenue. This covered our rent of $1,200, utilities of approximately $200, and basic groceries. Everything else, childcare costs, transportation, clothing, business expenses, debt payments, had to come from additional clients I brought in. In the first month of operating Cascade Digital Marketing, I secured 2 additional clients beyond Dataflow. One was a local restaurant that needed social media management and paid me $800 per month. The other was a real estate agent who wanted help with her website and online advertising and paid me $1,200 for the initial project with the possibility of ongoing work. These early clients came through a combination of networking, referrals, and aggressive outreach. I joined local business groups and attended networking events in the evenings when I could arrange childcare through Derek's family, who had generously offered to watch Sophia occasionally to help me get established. I reached out to every business contact I had accumulated over 10 years in the industry. I offered free consultations to potential clients, demonstrating the value I could provide before asking them to commit financially. I was shameless in pursuing every possible lead, because I understood that the first 6 months would determine whether Cascade Digital Marketing would survive or fail. During this period, I had no contact with Rebecca. She did not call or text to check how we were settling into the new house. She did not ask about Sophia. The silence was complete and definitive. First, this hurt. Despite everything, some part of me had hoped that once I was no longer living in her basement, once the financial arrangement that seemed to poison our relationship was ended, we might be able to reconnect as sisters. But Rebecca's silence made clear that the relationship had only ever been transactional for her. Without the rent money coming in, I had no value to her and therefore no place in her life. My mother was similarly absent. I had not spoken to her since the uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner months earlier. She had not reached out when I moved, though I assumed Rebecca had told her about my departure from the basement. The lack of contact from my mother was painful but not surprising. She had made her position clear years ago. Rebecca was the daughter who mattered, the one whose life and choices were celebrated and supported. I was the daughter who had disappointed her, whose struggles were evidence of poor judgment, who could not be relied upon to make good decisions. My mother had no interest in my life unless it was to point out my failures or compare me unfavorably to Rebecca. What I had not anticipated was how liberating this exclusion would become once I stopped fighting against it. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn approval from family members who were fundamentally unwilling to give it. I had shaped my choices and measured my worth based on their judgments. Now, living separately from Rebecca and having no contact with my mother, I was free to define success on my own terms. I was free to pursue my business without their skepticism undermining my confidence. I was free to build a life without constantly comparing it to Rebecca's life, or worrying about what my mother thought. This psychological shift was as important as any business strategy one implemented. I stopped internalizing the narrative that I was less capable or less deserving than Rebecca. I started recognizing that narrative for what it was. A story that served their purposes but had nothing to do with my actual abilities or potential. My freelance clients did not think I was incompetent. Data Flow Solutions did not think I made poor decisions. The new clients I was bringing in did not view me as someone who needed constant guidance and correction. They saw me as a skilled professional who delivered results. I began to see myself that way too. The exclusion from my family also became visible in ways that would have been devastating earlier but now served as motivation. Mother's Day arrived in May, about 6 weeks after I had moved out of Rebecca's basement. I had sent my mother a card with a brief note wishing her well. She did not respond. I later saw on Facebook, which I checked occasionally despite having minimal social media presence myself, that Rebecca had taken our mother out for an elaborate brunch at an upscale restaurant. The photos showed them smiling together, toasting with mimosas, enjoying a beautiful meal. The caption Rebecca had written read, "Celebrating the best mom with my favorite person. So grateful for everything you have done for me." I looked at those photos for a long time, studying my mother's face, Rebecca's smile, the expensive setting. There was no acknowledgement that our mother had another daughter. There was no recognition that I existed. I had been erased from the family narrative so completely that Mother's Day celebrations included only the daughter who had succeeded in the ways my mother valued. The exclusion was total and public. Rather than devastate me, this exclusion clarified things. I understood with finality that I would never have the relationship with my mother or Rebecca that I had once hoped for. They had made their choice about where I fit in the family structure, and that choice was nowhere. I could spend the rest of my life trying to change their minds, trying to prove I was worthy of inclusion, or I could accept reality and build a life that did not depend on their validation. I chose the latter. Sophia's school events during this period provided another window into how thoroughly I had been excluded from my family. The school held a spring concert in late May where Sophia's first grade class performed songs they had been practicing for months. Sophia was excited about the concert and had been talking about it for weeks. She had a small speaking part where she recited a poem about butterflies. I invited Derek's family, who had become like surrogate grandparents and uncle to Sophia. They attended and cheered enthusiastically when Sophia performed her part. After the concert, I saw several families gathering together for photos, grandparents and aunts and uncles all celebrating the children's performances. Sophia asked me quietly, "Mama, why doesn't Grandma or Aunt Rebecca ever come to my school things?" I had no good answer. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her grandmother and aunt simply do not care enough to attend? I told her that they were very busy with work, and that we had Derek's family who loved her and supported her. Sophia accepted this explanation, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. She was beginning to understand that she had family members who chose not to be present in her life, and that understanding was painful to witness. The pattern of exclusion extended beyond holidays and school events. When Sophia had her 7th birthday in September, 6 months after we had moved out of the basement, I threw her a party at our house. It was modest but cheerful, with decorations I had made myself and a cake I had baked. I invited her friends from school and their families. I invited Derek's family who had become our chosen family. I did not invite Rebecca or my mother because I knew they would not come, and I did not want Sophia to experience the disappointment of their absence on her special day. The party was a success. Sophia was happy, surrounded by friends who cared about her and adults who celebrated her. But later that evening, after the guests had left and Sophia was asleep, I checked Facebook again and saw that Rebecca had posted photos from a weekend trip to wine country with friends. She had been an hour away while her niece celebrated her 7th birthday, close enough that she could have attended if she had wanted to. But she had not wanted to. She had not even sent a card or a text message. The message was clear and consistent. Sophia and I did not matter to her. These accumulated exclusions, the forgotten birthdays, the missed school events, the holidays spent separately, the complete lack of interest in our lives, formed a pattern that I could no longer deny or rationalize. My family had decided that Rebecca was the daughter and sister who deserved their time and attention, and I was the one who did not. This was not a temporary situation caused by misunderstanding or circumstance. It was a deliberate choice they made repeatedly, month after month, year after year. Recognizing this pattern was painful, but it was also freeing. I stopped waiting for them to change. I stopped hoping that if I just achieved enough or proved myself successful enough, they would finally see me as worthy of inclusion. I accepted that their judgment of me said more about them than it said about me, and I redirected the energy I had been spending on seeking their approval toward building my business and creating a stable life for Sophia. The business grew steadily during those first 6 months. By the end of September, I had 8 regular clients generating approximately $7,000 per month in revenue. This was more than I had been making at the advertising agency when you combine my salary there with my freelance income. More importantly, the trajectory was positive. Each month brought new client inquiries, referrals from satisfied customers, and opportunities to expand services. I hired my first subcontractor, a graphic designer named Maria who could handle visual content creation, while I focused on strategy and client management. This allowed me to take on more clients without sacrificing quality. The financial situation remained tight but was improving. I was covering all our basic expenses without relying on credit cards for the first time since my divorce. I had started making more than minimum payments on my credit card debt, slowly chipping away at the balance. I had opened a business bank account and was maintaining clean separation between personal and business finances. I was learning about tax obligations for self-employed individuals and setting aside money for quarterly estimated tax payments. I was building not just a business but the financial infrastructure that would support long-term stability. During this period, I also invested in professional development. I completed several online certification programs in digital marketing, adding credentials that enhanced my credibility with potential clients. I studied case studies of successful marketing campaigns, analyzing what made them effective and how I could apply similar strategies for my clients. I stayed current with changes to social media algorithms, search engine optimization best practices, and emerging platforms. The digital marketing landscape was evolving rapidly, and staying ahead of those changes was essential to providing value that justified the rates I charged. One particular client engagement during this time demonstrated both the progress I was making and the contrast with how my family viewed my capabilities. A mid-sized technology company called Innova Tech hired me to develop and execute a comprehensive digital marketing strategy for a new product launch. The project was substantial, with a budget of $15,000 over 3 months. This was by far the largest contract I had secured as an independent consultant. The project required me to coordinate multiple marketing channels, manage a launch campaign timeline, create content, and analyze results. It was complex work that demanded strategic thinking and execution excellence. I delivered results that exceeded the client's expectations. The product launch campaign generated 40% more leads than their internal projections. The social media components of the campaign had engagement rates 3 times higher than their previous initiatives. The content I created drove significant traffic to their website and contributed to a successful launch that met their sales targets. The client was thrilled and immediately contracted me for ongoing marketing support at a monthly retainer of $3,000. This success with Innova Tech was professionally validating, but it also highlighted the disconnect between my actual capabilities and how my family perceived me. I was executing sophisticated marketing strategies for technology companies and driving measurable business results, yet my mother and Rebecca still viewed me as the struggling younger sister who made poor choices and needed guidance. They knew nothing about my business success because they had chosen not to be part of my life, and their exclusion meant they remained ignorant of who I actually was and what I was accomplishing. The holidays at the end of that first year in the St. John's house brought another round of exclusion that no longer surprised me but still stung. Thanksgiving came and went with no invitation from Rebecca or my mother. Christmas arrived without gifts or cards or any acknowledgement from them. I saw photos on social media of Rebecca and my mother celebrating together. Just the two of them. A complete family unit that had no space for Sophia or me. The photos showed them exchanging expensive gifts, enjoying elaborate meals, spending time together in ways they had never offered to spend time with us. Sophia asked about them occasionally, usually around holidays when the absence of extended family was most noticeable. I answered her questions honestly but gently. I explained that sometimes families are complicated, that sometimes people who are related by blood do not act like family, and that what matters is the people who show up for you and love you consistently. I told her about Derek's family who had welcomed us and supported us. I told her about my clients who believed in me and gave me opportunities. I told her that we were building our own family from people who chose to care about us, and that was just as valid and important as the family we were born into. These conversations with Sophia were difficult but necessary. I did not want to poison her against Rebecca and my mother by speaking badly of them, but I also did not want to teach her that she should accept poor treatment from family members just because they were family. I wanted her to understand that love and loyalty should flow both directions, that relationships require effort and care from all parties, and that it was acceptable to create boundaries with people who consistently hurt or disappointed you. By the end of that first year in business, I had achieved something I would not have believed possible 12 months earlier. I was supporting Sophia and myself entirely through my own business. I was paying our bills on time. I was making progress on debt repayment. I was providing a stable home for my daughter. I was building professional credibility and a reputation for delivering results. I was doing all of this without any help from the family members who had spent years telling me explicitly and implicitly that I was not capable of succeeding on my own. The exclusion from my family, which had once felt like rejection and abandonment, had become something else entirely. It had become proof that their judgment of me was wrong. It had become motivation to succeed despite their lack of support. It had become evidence that I did not need their approval or their presence to build a good life. They had excluded me from their family celebrations and their lives, but in doing so, they had freed me to discover what I was actually capable of when I stopped seeking their validation and started trusting my own judgment and abilities. The pattern of exclusion was clear and undeniable. Years of forgotten birthdays, missed events, unequal treatment, and deliberate separation had established beyond any doubt that my mother and Rebecca had decided I was not worth their time or attention. But that pattern had also revealed something they had not intended. It had revealed that their assessment of my worth and potential was fundamentally flawed, that I was capable of far more than they gave me credit for, and that their exclusion said everything about their limitations and nothing about mine. I had been trying for years to earn a place in a family that did not value me. Now I was building something they could never give me and could never take away, a sense of my own competence, worth, and power that came from within rather than from external validation. The second year of running Cascade Digital Marketing brought challenges I had not fully anticipated, but also opportunities that would fundamentally change the trajectory of my business and my life. By January, 15 months after launching the company, I had grown the client roster to 12 active accounts generating approximately $10,000 in monthly revenue. This was substantial progress, but I was reaching the limits of what I could accomplish working alone with occasional subcontractor support. The business had grown to the point where I needed to make a critical decision about its future direction. I could continue operating as a solo consultant with controlled growth and manageable workload, or I could take the risk of expanding into a true agency with employees, overhead, and the potential for much larger revenue but also much larger risk. This decision represented more than just a business choice. It was about how I saw myself and what I believed I was capable of achieving. The safe path would be to maintain the status quo, continue building slowly and sustainably, avoid the complications and expenses of hiring staff and leasing office space. This approach would provide steady income and allow me to maintain the flexibility I needed as a single mother. But it would also cap my earning potential and limit the impact I could have in the industry. The ambitious path would be to commit fully to building an agency that could compete with established firms, that could take on larger clients and more complex projects, that could grow into something significant. This approach carried substantial risk but also the possibility of creating real wealth and professional recognition. I spent weeks analyzing the decision from every angle. I created financial projections for both scenarios. I researched what it would take to hire employees, lease office space, and scale operations. I talked to other business owners who had made similar transitions, learning from their experiences and mistakes. I consulted with a business advisor at the Small Business Development Center, who helped me understand the financial and legal implications of different growth strategies. The more I researched, the clearer it became that if I wanted to build something truly substantial, something that could provide not just stability but prosperity for Sophia and me, I needed to take the risk of expanding. The timing of this decision coincided with a professional development opportunity that would prove crucial. I learned about an intensive executive education program at Portland State University focused on digital marketing strategy and analytics. The program was designed for marketing professionals who wanted to deepen their expertise and gain credentials that would enhance their credibility with corporate clients. It was a 6-month program that met 2 evenings per week and required substantial outside work including case studies, projects, and a capstone presentation. The program cost $8,000, which was a significant investment for someone who had only recently achieved financial stability. I debated whether I could afford the program both financially and in terms of time. The evening classes would require finding childcare for Sophia twice a week. The coursework would demand hours I was currently spending on client work or sleep. The tuition would consume a large portion of my savings and would need to be paid up front. But I also recognized that the program could provide exactly the advanced knowledge and credentials I needed to compete for larger corporate clients. The The program would cover advanced analytics, marketing automation, strategic planning frameworks, and emerging technologies in digital marketing. These were areas where I had practical experience but lacked formal training and certification. Having a certificate from a recognized university program could differentiate me from other consultants and justify the premium rates I wanted to charge. I decided to enroll in the program. The decision required careful financial planning and some sacrifice, but I believed it was essential for taking the business to the next level. I arranged for Derek's mother Susan to watch Sophia on the evenings I had class. Susan had retired from her law practice the previous year and had expressed interest in spending more time with Sophia, viewing her almost as an honorary granddaughter. This arrangement solved the childcare challenge and gave Sophia time with someone who genuinely cared about her, something she had been missing from her actual grandmother. The executive education program began in February and immediately proved to be both more challenging and more valuable than I had anticipated. The curriculum was rigorous and current, taught by professors who had both academic credentials and industry experience. My classmates were marketing directors and senior managers from established companies, people who had resources and support systems I lacked, but who were impressed by what I had built as a solo entrepreneur. The program pushed me to think strategically about marketing in ways that went beyond the tactical execution I had been focused on as a consultant. I learned frameworks for measuring marketing return on investment, for developing integrated campaigns across multiple channels, for using data analytics to optimize performance, and for aligning marketing strategy with broader business objectives. The capstone project for the program required students to develop a comprehensive marketing strategy for a real company and present it to a panel of industry executives. I chose to focus on a mid-sized manufacturing company called Pacific Industrial Solutions that had been struggling to modernize its marketing approach. The company had minimal digital presence, relied primarily on traditional sales channels, and was losing market share to more digitally savvy competitors. I developed a detailed strategy for transforming their marketing from traditional to digital, including specific recommendations for website redesign, content marketing, social media engagement, email marketing automation, and digital advertising. The strategy included implementation timelines, budget requirements, and projected return on investment calculations. My presentation to the evaluation panel was scheduled for late June, near the end of the program. I prepared extensively, rehearsing my presentation dozens of times, anticipating questions, refining my recommendations. The panel consisted of 3 senior marketing executives from major companies in the Portland area, including the chief marketing officer of a Fortune 500 company headquartered locally. I was nervous standing in front of these accomplished professionals, presenting work that would be evaluated against my classmates who had larger teams and more resources to draw on. But I was also confident in the quality of my strategy and my ability to defend the recommendations I had made. The presentation went exceptionally well. The panel asked challenging questions about implementation details, budget allocation, and measurement frameworks. I answered clearly and thoroughly, drawing on both the knowledge I had gained in the program and my practical experience executing similar strategies for clients. When the presentations concluded and the panel deliberated, I felt cautiously optimistic that I had performed well. The program directors announced the results a week later. My capstone project had been selected as the top submission in the cohort of 35 students. The panel had been particularly impressed by how I had combined strategic thinking with practical implementation planning, creating a roadmap that a company could actually execute, rather than just theoretical recommendations. The recognition came with a small cash prize of $1,000, but more importantly, it came with professional validation from respected industry leaders. One of the panel members, the chief marketing officer named Richard Thompson, approached me after the awards ceremony and asked if I would be interested in discussing a potential consulting engagement with his company. This conversation would lead to the largest client contract I had secured up to that point, but I will return to that shortly. Completing the executive education program represented more than just professional development. It represented a commitment to investing in myself and my capabilities in ways my family never had and never would. When I was 18 and had needed help paying for college, my mother and the stepfather I never had in this story's version had refused. When I had struggled financially after my divorce, No one in my family had offered to help me gain skills or education that could improve my situation. They had been content to let me struggle, to watch me barely survive, even to profit from my desperation as Rebecca had done by charging exploitative rent. Now, through my own hard work and strategic choices, I was obtaining the advanced education and credentials that would enable me to compete at the highest levels of my profession. I was doing for myself what my family had refused to do, and the accomplishment felt sweeter because of that. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.